not sponsored. There is, or should I say there was, a lot of hyperbole around the Sony a6400. I don't really hear people talking about it so much anymore though. Hey, I'm not gonna lie, this video is kind of like a year late, but you guys know me.
He's a good man, and thorough.
Oh, alright.
Maybe we don't hear so much about the a6400 these days because it met everyone's expectations and there wasn't much to say about it. Maybe it's because Sony releases cameras more frequently than I get blackout drunk and go to Taco Bell.
Impossible.
Maybe it's because the camera is just kinda mediocre. The a6400 is another one of Sony's mirrorless E-mount cameras. It's small, it looks like a Sony, it has a plethora of features that both photo and video people alike would be interested in. $900 makes this more of a middle-of-the-road type of camera, but is that price tag worth your shekels? I'll give you my thoughts and then you can decide, so let's just jump into it. But before we do, I'm going to need you to flip your LCD screen into the upright position so you can get a better view of the subscribe button and then gently but also firmly touch it. The subscribe button. Touch it.
Thank you!
In terms of photography, I think this camera really hits the mark. And it's kind of funny because I feel like everyone on YouTube really emphasizes the video capabilities of this camera when in fact to me, the stills is where the camera really shines. Apparently the a6400 has Sony's new and improved color science, which frankly, if you're shooting raw and editing the crap out of your photos, the colors straight out of camera probably aren't the most important thing in the world to you. But the update is appreciated and it is noticeable. Those colors will matter to you if you're using straight up JPEGs, which hey, some people do. I know a wedding photographer who just shoots JPEG. No, we're not getting into that debate. I'm happy to say the colors are certainly improved from what I was seeing straight out of my first generation Sony a7S. The skin tones especially look much more presentable straight out of camera. But I think the star of the show here is the eye autofocus. It honestly blew my face off. The accuracy of this eye autofocus, it's bananas, man. I'd say probably like 90 to 95% of my portrait shots were intact, sharp focus. There's some sort of AI power behind it too, I don't really know too much about it, but apparently it's just better at finding and tracking faces. It also works on animals. Unfortunately, I don't have a cute pet to show off. I guess you'll have to take Sony's word for that one. For those of you more interested in the technical, the camera has 425 phase detection autofocus points and 425 contrast detection autofocus points. Damn, that was a hard one to say. The autofocus for stills is impressive, I can't lie. The speed at which you can shoot is 11 FPS, which is
quite fast.
Keep in mind you do have a buffer and that is dependent on what kind of memory card you're using. Mine usually goes between 40 and 50 shots, which honestly is way more than I'll ever need in burst mode. But once you do fill that buffer, the camera just has a stroke and it doesn't really let you do anything else. You can't keep shooting, the camera heats up, it's just not a good time. On that note though, I can say I've never experienced the a64 overheating and turning off. The camera has gotten warm, but it has never just given me a heat warning and shut off. Though I have seen people online mention that issue. High ISO performance is nothing to write home about. Once you go above that 6400 ISO range, ironic because of the name, it starts to get a little questionable. Once you hit 20,000, it's gross. Honestly, it did surprise me a little bit considering Sony's track record of high ISO performance, but I suppose you can chalk that up to the APS-C size sensor. That might have something to do with it. The a6400 also has a pop-up flash, which I know some of you are thinking using that would be heresy, and yeah, you're right. Pop-up flashes on DSLR and mirrorless cameras definitely cause the crusades, but in the event that you're using it on the a6400, you should be aware of this somewhat major design flaw. If your lens is too long, and I'm not referring to like the focal length, like not too telephoto, like literally the length of the lens, the flash will illuminate it. It'll put a nice little shadow of the lens in your photo if you're holding it the wrong way. I've had this issue with the Sigma 16 f1.4, which tons of people use with this camera, so it is something to consider. And by the way, that's my friend Maria. She's an artist and she's also on YouTube, so go check her out. Hi Maria. Now, while I'm not a wildlife or sports photographer, I need to address what I consider to be the biggest issue the a6400 suffers from. The camera has terrible, horrible, no good, very bad rolling shutter. If you shoot wildlife or sports, that rolling shutter is probably going to be a deal breaker for you. But I'm going to talk more about that issue in the video section, and that's because the video mode is where I really saw the problem. As a studio camera, or if you're doing calmer things like, portraits where you're not moving around, I think you'll be pretty impressed with the photo mode on this camera. I've gotten some shots that I truly love out of this camera. Here's the bottom line. The level of detail you get from the 24.2 megapixel APS-C sensor is fantastic. The autofocus performance you get in the photo mode of the camera is great, and the colors look good. But man, that rolling shutter is enough to make you want to call a priest. I don't know, so you can exercise the camera because it's possessed or... Listen, shut up, the rolling shutter's bad, alright? Let's talk video, since I mainly bought this camera for its video features, so I'm gonna come out swinging here. Let's address the elephant in the room. I think a lot of YouTubers are very wrong about this camera. Don't at me. I don't at all think this is the vlogger's dream camera. Now I need to do a quick aside here. Whenever I mention vlogging cameras, there's inevitably someone in the comments whining about that, so just so you have some context as to where I got the idea that the a6400 is a vlogging camera, I got it from Sony. And also these fine people.
Sony's definitely marketing this camera towards the vlogging demographic.
Sony is pushing this camera hard for vlogging.
Thought, hey, this could be a great vlogging camera.
And people were saying a6400, vlogging this, vlogging that.
But what exactly makes the a6400 a vlogging camera? Well, this. Here's the thing, I understand the sentiment of people who don't want to hear about video crap on a camera like this, but these cameras shoot video! And as long as they do that, people are going to be interested in the video capabilities. So when I first started hearing about the a6400, I thought it would be a great addition to my lineup. The perfect camera to hand off to people while I make my videos, but I quickly realized that the a6400 is not really what it's cracked up to be. I'd argue that there's a number of reasons as to why this camera shouldn't even be a consideration if you're a serious video person on a budget. This is my humble opinion. The a6400 is a very capable camera for stills, but it really has some critical misses in the video department. Let's start with the good. It has 4K. There is a relatively minor crop on the sensor down to a Super 35 mode, which isn't the end of the world, but it is there. There's no recording limit, which honestly is a really cool feature and not super common in cameras like this. At least at the time of the release, that does seem to be a feature that's becoming more common these days. You've got all your flavors of frame rates, they're on screen right now, and there's no arbitrary ditching of 24 frames a second. Sorry, I feel like I'm being a little passive aggressive.
No, your aggression isn't passive at all, it's active aggression.
I do like Canon, that's why I make fun of them. Anyway, you have your typical Sony picture profiles like the older cameras, but you also have access to the very powerful S-Log and S-Log2 profiles, as well as hybrid log gamma. I personally enjoy using the hybrid log gamma mode because it gives you a little bit more dynamic range, and it's still a relatively simple color grading workflow. Okay, now it's time for some bad things.
Hold on to your butts.
Content warning, if you have a tendency of yakking due to motion sickness, skip to this time code.
I just got up and walked to the door and I saw it.
Alright, let's do it. Let's talk about this rolling shutter. This is bad. This is really bad. So first off, here's a quick whip pan test. Disgusting. Now many of you might say, well, that's not realistic. I mean, how often are you going to be doing that motion? Well, shush. Let me show you something. If you're still not sure what rolling shutter necessarily means, all you gotta do is keep your eyes on lines that should be straight. As the camera moves, they start to bend. This rolling shutter issue is prevalent in every single tiny move you make.
Shut up! God damn. Fucking boys.
There doesn't really seem to be a tremendous difference between the 4K and 1080 in terms of the rolling shutter, although the 4K does look marginally worse considering it does have more pixels, I guess. That's how that works, I don't know. That's just to my eyes, but honestly they're both pretty bad. And since the a6400 doesn't have any sort of in-body image stabilization, you're gonna have these rolling shutter issues. Even on a gimbal, things don't look great if you're moving around too quickly. They get a little bit of that jello wobbly effect going on. So yeah, I'm gonna leave this one up to you. If you're in a studio, the camera's not moving around too much, it might be perfect for your needs, but if you're moving around and vlogging outside like that, I find that rolling shutter to be way too distracting. Let's talk about the video autofocus. While I was singing the praises of the eye autofocus and the autofocus performance on the stills, the video autofocus performance is not as great. Some would say it's a little hit or miss. Here's the thing, right out of the box, the a6400's video autofocus is a little all over the place. Sometimes it's awesome, sometimes it's horrible. Sometimes it just straight up panics, like this. Is that you? I'm scared. You want me to focus on you, right? No, that, the mountains, you, no, this, that, no. It can be a nightmare. When the autofocus is acting up, it is way worse than the way the Canon 6D Mark II hunts for autofocus. And if you're a longtime follower of this channel, you know I had words about that camera's autofocus. When I'm shooting alone, I want this thing to see me in the center of the frame, filling most of the frame, and I really don't want to have to worry about the camera hunting like Dick Cheney. Get it? He's not a good hunter because he shot that dude when he was hunting for quail. That was a topical and timely joke, I know. But it was perfectly timed because the a6400 finally nailed focus on me. Look at that, yay, a round of applause, good job buddy. But if you spend some time and get to know the menus and set up your autofocus the way you like it, you can get much more usable results. Even though I've experimented with those settings, I still have occasions every now and then where the autofocus kind of just freaks out a little bit. And I will say the autofocus is definitely good more often than bad, but I can't just have clips like that and not show you and pretend it's not an issue. Backlighting doesn't do this camera's autofocus any favors, and low light definitely doesn't either. And to take a page out of the mighty Phillip Bloom's book,
if you cannot trust the autofocus, you cannot use it.
If you're using the touch to track, the tracking focus, whatever the hell you call it, that works really reliably. Like if I have someone behind the camera and they tap on my face, it's gonna track me pretty damn well. But if the camera's left to its own devices, it just does some goofy shit. And another pretty big bummer in the autofocus department is that incredibly powerful eye autofocus doesn't work in video mode. It's just not there. It's not an option. Why? And the last thing I want to touch on is the overall video quality. I think the 4K files look pretty crispy. They're wrapped in the XAVCS 4K codec at 100 megs per second. They look nice. The 1080p assets are wrapped in the XAVCS HD codec, that's a lot of letters, and apart from the 120p, which gives you that 100 megs per second, all the flavors of 1080 are 50 megs and below. And while the Gen 1 A7S is also 1080p 50 megs per second, the 1080 from the A7S just looks better than the 1080 out of the a6400. I'm really not sure why that is. It's just the a6400 just looks really kind of chunky and blocky compared. So if you're cool with using 4K all the time and you have the media storage to deal with that sort of a habit, sweet. But if you maybe do something like YouTube and you maybe wanted a vlogging camera and you like to record in 1080, you might be a little unhappy with the results, especially in lower light scenarios. The a6400 is one of Sony's mirrorless cameras, so of course it's gonna be small. It's a small bean. I'm being coy, it's way too small. It's actually really uncomfortable in my hands. I'm gonna reuse this joke for a third time in my videos now. Maybe it's because I have big meaty claws! Honestly, without this L bracket from UU-Rig, not sponsored by the way, but now that I'm doing this video and I took it off, I remember how much worse this camera feels to hold. It also reminds me of the Amazon description for this bad boy. The little thumb is no longer nowhere to put. Classic. The camera just doesn't feel great. The buttons on the back feel particularly cheap, especially the control wheel here. And I really don't like how the shutter feels. It feels like cheap plastic. That's my new hit single. And this really doesn't matter at all, but I just hate how the shutter sounds. It's just... words, English. On the topic of buttons, there aren't enough buttons, well, and dials. I think if this thing had one more dial, that would be really sweet, because out of the box you gotta hit right on the control wheel to change the ISO, and use that same wheel to change the shutter speed. I don't care if it's nitpicky, that's important to me. The hinge on the flip up screen is very odd, it feels really stiff, and I'm kinda surprised I haven't damaged it by now, knowing me. And of course, the classic hot shoe issue. If you weren't already aware, the hot shoe is perfectly aligned with the flip-up screen, so if you're using a mic, it's going to be directly in the way. Of course, you can easily solve this issue by using an L bracket like mine or any of the others on Amazon. There's a bunch of choices where you can just move the mic out of the way, but frankly, it's annoying. Like, honestly, did they think about this design and what the camera would be used for? I mean, they did because they said it was a vlogging camera, so why did they block the screen? While we're on the topic of the flip screen, here's another one that really butters my biscuits. You can touch to focus, but you can't touch the menu. The electronic viewfinder is pretty good. It is definitely not as good as something like the A7 Mark III, but of course that camera's like twice the price, so to be expected. One new-ish feature, which I don't know how new it is, I don't know when they introduced this, but it wasn't on the original A7S, so it's new to me. If you go under Setup 1, Monitor Brightness, you have a setting called Sunny Weather, and it really helps you see the LCD screen in the bright sunlight. It's awesome, but that extra brightness does indeed drain the battery. And this camera is using the older Sony batteries, which, let me tell you, don't last very long. Battery life is miserable. You need to bring quite a few with you if you plan on filming the whole day. If you're primarily on stills, that's a different story. 1 or 2 batteries should give you a solid day. But if you're in video mode, especially 4K, you can easily run through 5 or 6 of these batteries in a day. This one's almost a meme on this channel at this point, because I always talk about the record button, but man, the record button's still in that weird spot. I'm glad that they moved it out on the A7 Mark III and the A7S Mark III, but man, why is it still here? And if you didn't already see this one coming, menu bad. It was kind of shocking to me to find out that they actually managed to make the menu have even more pages than the A7S and be more confusing. Fortunately, you can program a custom menu of your favorite features, but man, those settings that you don't need all the time, don't ask me where they are, because it's like friggin' Narnia in there. There's no headphone jack to be found on the a6400, but again, you're not going to be wearing headphones while you're vlogging, so whatever. I mean, honestly, I'm just not surprised by this shit anymore. It used to really upset me, but now it's just like, I'm in an abusive relationship, and it's just like, okay, no headphone jack, sure, cool. Who does that anymore, right? Who uses headphones? I gotta sneeze. I should also mention that there is only one card slot. I know that's like a hot button issue these days, but one card slot SD, and it's in with the battery, which is my least favorite. I hate having to go under the camera and open the battery thing, and with the cage on, it is just such a pain in the ass to get the SD card out of the camera. It's not great. And I know the L bracket thing is my fault. I'm the one who put it on there, but frankly, I'd rather feel better holding the camera and deal with the fiddliness of getting the SD card out of there instead of just holding this weirdly small camera with 2 fingers. Also, I did not realize what a struggle fest this clip was. This is a really great metaphor for how this year's been. Even though my face isn't in this clip, you can just see the depression. It's great. Mediocre. I said that in the intro. That's a word I don't throw around very often. I mean, I've definitely self-deprecated and called myself mediocre on this channel quite a few times, but I've rarely used that word without a joke attached to it. Being mediocre is one of the worst things. See, like, if you're gonna be bad, I want to see something that's like majestically bad. The a6400 for me is just a very mediocre camera. While the photo mode works and it's good enough, the video and the ease of use and ergonomics are just so bad. It just turns it into this meh kind of camera that just ends up sitting at home more often than not. Most of the time I go for my A7S or my 6D Mark II instead, and both of those cameras are so much older than this one. This might sound really lame, but there's just no magic for me when I use the camera. There's no inspiration, it's not particularly fun to use. It's unfortunate, but the a6400 just feels like a tool, just something to get the job done. If you plan on mainly using this for photography and you can get over the rolling shutter issue, the price is pretty good. It could be a fantastic entry point into the Sony system. But for me, it doesn't bring that same value. I'm already in the system, so overall, the camera was kind of a disappointment. And hey, if you love this camera, awesome. I would never take that away from you. But this one, it just doesn't do it for me. Let us boot up the Owen Wilson rating system. I'm giving this one a very middling 5 Owen Wilson wows out of 10. The photo mode is decent, video and ergonomics are just not there for me. And guys, before we wrap things up here, we of course have the weekly feature. We were talking about dogs this week, and Danis Maximus on Instagram submitted this one, and to me that just screams dog. Like the look of confusion on the dog's face, there's vans in the frame, PBR, what else could you ask for? And I want to include an honorable mention here just because Aroma Tissue submitted this one, and I have so many questions. And guys, that's gonna do it for this video. I know it was a longer one. Thanks for hanging with me to the end. Look at you, you're a champion. I like you. Thank you so much. A special thanks to Tree and Yazola on Instagram. They did a ton of portrait shooting with me, which really helped make this video possible. A huge special thanks to Nitara from the Super Dankness crew for filming a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, and also a huge thank you to Rebecca for filming some of the behind the scenes stuff, and I'm sure Keith probably did too, so and I just, you know, Keith's my boy, so thank you. And the mega hugest thank you to you guys, because we broke 8,000 subscribers. Holy shit, that's really cool, man. Guys, we are closing in on 10K, so I'm gonna really need you guys to smash that subscribe button and share it to your friends. And for just such an occasion, I've prepared a new song, so if you're watching the full video, you know you get to enjoy this majesty. Alright guys, see you next time, bye!
And will you tell your friends to smash the subscribe button? To get this whole illusion